Well, it's a privilege to be with you this afternoon and share on the subject of mission agencies functioning in a network society. So let me just run through this presentation and we'll have a time of discussion afterwards. Jack Welch was the former CEO of General Electric, and he is famously quoted as saying, "When the rate of change inside your organization is less than the rate of change outside your organization, the end is in sight." Well, we have surely been through a lot of change in the global church and particularly with mission agencies. And so we're going to look at some of that now. But this is taking place in what is called today by sociologists the network society. We are no longer industrial or post-industrial. We are now in the network society. And Manuel Castells, in this book, The Rise of the Network Society, spells out what that means and how that functions. He highlights things like that we're highly interconnected by technology. There are geopolitical alliances, trade agreements, and cultural values that influence how we work together. But that is the defining element of how organizations, companies, industries function today. The focus is on becoming strategically connected globally so as to be more profitable. And that's the context that we're in as the evangelical church. Now, let me just briefly highlight this, and I'll touch on it later, but we, in the pre-network society, basically everyone functioned in bounded sets. You were part of an organization, or you were part of a network, almost like it was your identity. You associated with them, and or you're part of a company, and you were either in or out. And there was this strong line around the outside that defined whether you were in. And there were certain protocols to become a member, and those that were outside were definitely not inside. And you functioned, the company, the ministry, the network, the organization, whatever, functioned in this bounded set, what was called the bounded set. We now have moved over to the centered set in the network society. And of course, for us as Christians, there's a cross in the middle. We exist to follow Christ and what he's doing. That's our focus. But if you're involved in ministries, if your ministry or organization is involved with refugees, then you are part of this highly complex and highly interconnected world of the church, the global church. And you can be strategically connected to others that are also have that same focus, that same centered set idea. It could be a church in a different part of the country, world that's praying for the same people that you're trying to work with as far as refugees, but you can associate with these. And we'll talk more about what it means to have an organizational identity in a centered set context. For the mission agencies, there's three drivers that have changed the paradigm of missions. This has turned missions upside down. Today, there is a church in every country of the world. There are believers. Christ is working. He said he was going to build his church, and he's doing it. That did not exist 100 years ago, even maybe 50 years ago in some cases. But there are today, and we must act differently because of that reality. There's now technology that facilitates connections. That is another critical reality. People from a church in Buenos Aires, Argentina, connect with pastors in Aleppo, Syria, because they can. And that's a dynamic reality that exists today, the technology. And we live in what is called the largest global diaspora movement ever recorded in the history of mankind. United Nations says there's over 450 million people moving from their historic geographic context to other parts of the world. So that obviously is having huge impact on mission agencies, especially the ones that see themselves as sending agencies. because their target is moving and they've moved into the apartments behind the main office, the sending office. But all of this means that we have moved from the West to the rest, that paradigm of missions, to the new paradigm of from anywhere to everywhere. And for a mission agency, there are two things before you can really understand about functioning within a network society. There is this first element that has to be addressed, and that's adapting to the new paradigm of from anywhere to everywhere. How do you adapt a mission agency that was birthed in a reality where the only way to do missions was to join a mission agency and go in that organization, with that organization? And I'll talk about that. This is huge. This is really difficult. But for the Western agencies that were born in that paradigm that call themselves sending agencies, this must be addressed first. The second thing that needs to be looked at is, how do you effectively function in a network society? And we're going to talk about that bounded set, and the centered set a little more later in the practicalities of how you bring that about. But let's jump first here into the challenge of Western mission agencies in adapting. And so I've got the challenges there on the left: the global church, communication, and global diaspora. And let's look at different elements here of how things have changed and why this Western model of missions is starting to break down. So in the past, joining a sending agency was the only option for working cross-culturally. Someone said, "I'm a missionary." The next question was, "Who are you with? Who do you serve with?" And that's changing today. Today we have tent making and just simple employment opportunities all over the world. I would estimate that at least 50% of the Latin American and the African and Asian mission movement are working in this category. They don't join a mission agency. They are out there intentionally, in many cases, intentionally taking employment opportunities because they want to be salt and light in these other areas of the world, unreached areas. We have church-to-church collaboration, partnerships. Before, the local church had to work through an agency. Today, they're free. They can develop partnerships with churches, from a church in Chicago with a church in Ukraine, a church in Toronto with a church in Cairo. These church-to-church partnerships and collaboration is so rich, especially when you have the diaspora from that country in your backyard, and there can be that dialogue back and forth. This is a vibrant way of working cross-culturally today, something that did not exist in the past. We also have now virtual connections. Many professional people are involved in ministry or connections in work virtually around the world, and using that virtual connection strategically to be salt and light. And we have different models of agencies. In the past, every agency had a sending office and they had the receiving on the field end. Now we have agencies that do just sending, and they succumb to many other groups or churches around the world. There's others that have no sending. They simply receive into ministry context. Huge numbers. I mean, in IRS estimates there's over 80,000 501c3s in North America that function particularly cross-culturally in some way. Now, not all of them would be sending of missionaries or doing the mission work, but no longer are we having to have these big, highly developed structures that we have in the past. Let's talk about the sending models that are existing. The old sending model centralized services, while newer agencies are outsourcing the services that they offer. So traditionally, within a sending office, you had the services of mobilization and recruitment, the selection of missionaries, the training, financial management, and member care. Today, only selection is required by a mission agency. How do you select who you're going to take into your organization? There are agencies or mission, it's hard to call them agencies because they don't look like what they used to be, but these entities that are highly attractive. people seek them out. You don't have to recruit to get people to come to you, because they are known as this entity that works with the Uyghur, say, and they're pulling people and connecting people from around the world. There's others that collaborate with people that have had cross-cultural experience to do the recruitment, the mobilization. There's different models there. The selection is still there. You've got to select. You got to make a decision. Are we going to take, these people, or from what country, etc. Training is being outsourced today. Phenomenal training opportunities, cross-cultural training in Munich, in Paris, in Toronto, in New York, in Chicago, Detroit, different parts of the world that provide cross-cultural training much better than any organization can do in their own in-house effort. Financial management used to be that the only way to do receiving of donations for members, for ministries, for projects, was to come through an agency. That is no longer the case. In North America, with the change of the tax laws, 94% of individuals in North America do not itemize their deductions anymore. They don't need a 501c3 tax receipt. And there's entities that are being set up that manage donations, transfer of funds. Local churches are doing that today. So I see anywhere between 0 admin charge to up to 5% admin charge on financial management. Member care, rather than having a group of individuals in a central office doing member care, missionaries today are starting to recruit their own member care team. A medical doctor, a dentist, educators if they have children, counselors, people that are on the team that are with them, that are the core group that really cares for this individual and will come alongside if they need help. And then, of course, they access some of the really professional member care services that are offered in UK, in Europe, in North America. If a catastrophe happens and something that really dramatic for the missionary couple. So the new structures are not the big offices with all the people in there working. They outsource these services that are traditionally associated with that sending model. We also think about receiving. A lot of times we think about sending because we were thinking of that, and that was the value added in the past that an agency could offer the local church. But there's also the receiving of missionaries. There are agencies that are starting to focus on attracting missionaries from around the world, attracting prayer support from churches around the world, collaborative efforts from anywhere around the world into their ministry focus. They're becoming an extremely attractive place to connect because of the focus of what they're trying to accomplish on an unreached people group, etc. They might attract full-time workers that are with another organization to be part of their team. They don't have to join that organization to be a part of that. That's extremely attractive. Another kind of receiving that we see today is, and this is really phenomenal, and there are sending entities today that are seconding missionaries to host believer-led ministries rather than just to traditional agencies. So sending groups out of Germany, out of Central America, South America, parts of Africa that look for other parts of the body of Christ. It could be a seminary that's run in Beirut, Lebanon. It could be a ministry in Lagos led by a group of local churches to street children. But those ministries are becoming the place that receive workers from around the world, not to be received by this international organization that are expats in the very country, but rather by believers who walk with the Lord in that ministry context. And that's something that's very attractive to young people, to be able to be received at the airport, to be taken home by the pastor and his wife, to live with the family, eat their food, be a part of their ministry, part of their church. Not a part of an expat community within the ministry context. So receiving is changing significantly. There's the issue of diversity. Agencies have traditionally wrestled with this Some of the larger ones are trying to manage cultural and economic diversity within their bounded set, within their organization. Some of them are managing to become centered set identities, but they've tried to do it all in-house. How do they have the poor, the wealthy, and the huge cultural diversity within-house? But the vast majority, especially of non-Western agencies, and really Western agencies as well, function as they are. Their economic identity as well as their cultural identity, but are seeking to be connected, become connected in a centered set world with the huge diversity that exists out there. So they're focusing on that, adapting to this diversity in that context rather than in-house, as it were. The financial engine, this is really the Achilles heel of the old traditional Western sending model. Most Western agencies generate income to cover admin and leadership expenses, supplementing salaries for leaders, people in leadership in the central offices by charging admin fees. And these fees keep going up. It is absolutely incredible to see what some of the agencies are charging today. But that's the model. So missionaries that join the organization have to raise support for themselves, and a significant portion of that is going to supplement this administrative structure, this big structure that was so relevant in the past, but is very questionable today. But the new reality is undermining the sustainability of this model. There are ways to get money transferred that are, and I'll touch on this in just in a minute here, but finances, it doesn't take that kind of administrative charges to sustain an office in order to do ministry in another part of the world today. So we're going to talk about that. The reality of our highly interconnected world, financial transfers, all of that is undermining the sustainability of the traditional Western sending offices. And then we have the breakdown of trust. There are many organizations that have what's called a donor trust policy. The donor trust policy says we will honor the intent of the donor as long as we can legally do so. So if they give the money to this specific missionary or this specific ministry, the organization with this policy on their books, they will honor that as long as they can legally do so. And there are times when legally they can no longer do that. But while they can do it, it's amazing how many organizations today do not have that. Let me give you just a couple examples of what we've seen and is being talked about within the missions community. There are organizations that will borrow money, ministry money that a missionary has raised, or project money. They'll find that that money has been borrowed by the organization with an IOU saying they'll return it later. There are those that raise ministry funds and find that those ministry funds, even though they could be honored, used for this specific ministry, the organization says, well, in this case, we can use it for something else, and they take it for that. Or in a situation, for instance, in our situation, the organization we served with, we raised money for our retirement funds. For the first 16 years of our service, the organization managed our retirement funds. After that, we individually, the policy changed and everyone had to manage their own retirement funds, only to come to learn that the agency has used that money for other things. So we don't have access to that. And the issue here that I want to point out is these are not bad people that make these decisions within these organizations. These are good people. You would be blessed if they bought a house in your neighborhood and they moved in there. And I really mean that. But the idea that what is legal is okay to do has led these individuals to say, well, we can do it. It's legal. We can do it without having that. And maybe the word moral is a little strong, but this moral obligation to honor the intent of the donor. And the other very interesting thing, which I was shocked to learn, I had always understood that the ECFA, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, existed to ensure the building of trust between donors and the organization. But the president of ECFA, the former president, there's been a change, but the former president told me personally, with others in the room, that they would never require that their members of ECFA have a donor trust policy. And the reason was, he said, because legally they're not required to do that. And that's true. They are not required to do it, okay? But in our world today, that undermines the trust in the organization and the fact that there's all kinds of other ways to transfer money. If the only way to get money into a ministry or to a missionary was to go through the organization, we would have a real problem. But I'm finding a huge growth of individuals who are transferring money for ministry to objectives that they're doing around the world. And I've developed a list. I actually have a page of 8 different methods that I've discovered that people are using to transfer money. And the interesting thing is, these are missionaries that work for organizations that depend on funds going through their organization and the administrative, but they don't trust the organization, so they transfer independently. You know, we're in the process of transferring $1,000 to a church in Beirut. And the cost for that transfer is $5. Okay, $5. We're transferring some $2,000 to a ministry in Bolivia. The cost for that transfer is $0. No admin charge, no cost at all. There are different ways that this can be done. There are entities that will receipt and transfer through bank wires, through Western Union. I mean, there's different ways to do it. But my point is, this is all breaking down the trust and the sustainability, really, the sustainability. And I want to mention again, we're not talking about people that are looking to embezzle this money. I've never heard any of that discussed or suggested within mission agencies. There might be examples of that, but these are individuals who I think are highly pressured to get that income. So the traditional model I feel is coming apart, and many people feel it's coming apart. The challenge of partnering globally is pulling us apart, pulling those entities apart. The length of service used to be that when we joined the mission, it was over 25 years was the average length of missionary service. Now it's less than 5. That's not even enough time to learn a language and become culturally adept to be able to understand what's going on. There are few agencies today that require Bible training. You know, I was sitting in a room with the leadership of Prairie Bible Institute, Briarcrest out of Canada, Columbia International University, Moody Bible Institute, and several others. And they said to the mission leaders, we started as ministries to train missionaries to go overseas. And today, you don't even require membership. You don't require training, Bible training, formal Bible training to accept your missionaries. And this is not because the mission agencies don't want that. They would love to have well-trained individuals within their membership, but it's not happening. And the reason is, if they depended on just ones with 1 year, just basic 1 year of focused Bible training, the structures would fall apart and they wouldn't keep the lights on because of the expenses. There's the challenge of diaspora ministry. I had a director of a mission agency that sends missionaries to Japan. And he said, you know, right here in Detroit, right next door to us, are Japanese working in the auto industry. And it's easier for us to send missionaries to Japan than to figure out how to function and work with the Japanese that are right in our backyard here, because it's outside of our box. It's outside of the way we function. And there's the breakdown of trust around finances. So the traditional model is coming apart. And that's inevitable. It's not that the model is bad. It was relevant in its time, but our context has changed. And within the next 5 years, I'm convinced that we will be seeing some huge changes with the traditional agencies, because that model is not sustainable.